Okay, hope all is well out there. I'm gonna wait for some folks to hop on, or maybe not. I actually don't have the chat enabled in this live. I'm doing a spiral astromancy deep dive into the houses. And I started this particular series as pre-recorded, but I must admit I was getting a little bit worn out with the editing. I've been doing a lot of editing these days, and I was kind of not recording any, I wasn't recording any of the spiral astromancy stuff because I didn't want to edit, you know. And I've also been in a weird vibe, or not weird, but just in a interesting state of like not really wanting to be on camera that much. And so yeah, but I'm doing the live, but I'm doing comments off because I kind of want to keep this very specific. This is a continuation of spiral astromancy. So we're going to get started. I hope whoever watches this, that you learned something from this, okay? So I've been talking a lot about the spiral, a lot in the sounds that I've been putting out on YouTube. And I first also just want to shout out the new subscribers, okay? I've had a lot of new subscribers come on over to the channel. So I just want to thank you for the new subscribers who have been coming on board. And also like the supporters, like folks who are on the Patreon and who've been rocking with me through all of the topsy-turviness of this navigation of the simulation. All right. And I just want to say I appreciate you. I see you. And the same for the new folks who are on my YouTube community or membership community. So that's something new that I'm doing. So thank y'all for supporting as well. Okay, but I'm going to keep this brief. I don't have a lot of time today, but I want to get this message out on the third house. Like this started coming into me really deeply as soon as Mercury retrograde hit. And it's really annoying to me when, because I can kind of feel what's going on with the planets. And I don't follow astrology anymore, even though this is going to be somewhat of a topic on astrology, but I don't follow traditional astrology anymore. But when a planet does something weird or interesting, I just know it intuitively. And sometimes it's annoying because that's a sign too that you're like still caught up in the simulation if you're able to kind of feel what the planets are doing, I guess. And maybe that's me being too hard on myself because we're all in this simulation in one way or another. But that being said, the third house has really been on my mind. And a lot of downloads have been emerging through my body, through different things that's happening in my environment as it relates to what the third house really means. So let's go through the traditional horoscope of what the third house is. Okay, so real quick, I'm just gonna first start off with what the third house is, because some folks might be coming to this channel or to this live and they might not know about the third house. So I'm gonna just do a quick quick skim through on what traditional astrologers would tell you what the third house is, but I'll say it a million times and probably still say it. I am not an astrologer, y'all. Like I don't do astrology in the traditional sense. That being said, I've studied it for many, many years. And a few years ago, I started to realize that I needed to somehow like learn about astrology in order to transcend it. I started to see that a lot of the stuff that I was looking to transcend was showing up in my birth chart, you know, whether or not, and there's a lot of folks out there that might be like, well, I don't really follow astrology, or if I don't believe in it, then it makes it not real. That's true. That is true to an extent. But then there's this other aspect of the astrology chart can show you a map to where you can retrieve certain things that may have been, I don't even want to say taken from you in the simulation, but maybe aspects of yourself that have been buried deep underground. It can make you a little bit more integrated if you're able to truly see where the control mechanisms are, and you can find that in your birth chart. So I don't utilize astrology as a way to be like, your sun is in Cancer, your moon is in Pisces, this is what you are. That's your NPC profile though in the simulation. And one thing that the quote unquote controllers of the simulation, what they'll do is they will program. It's really like a code. There will be certain codes programmed, and that comes through different transits. So transits, astrological transits, when two planets have a conversation with each other, a lot of times that's a third house kind of thing. Communication. Third house is communication. Third house is ruled by Mercury. Mercury's in retrograde. It's no accident, I think, that I started getting these downloads once Mercury's in retrograde. Mercury retrograde is a great time to reflect and look at things beneath the surface because things slow down. I noticed as soon as Mercury got into retrograde, all of a sudden, like my Wi-Fi was doing weird stuff, like all this stuff, like I wasn't online as much. And at first I wanted to kind of be like, freaking out about it. But then I started to go a little deeper and be like, well, how can I put myself offline in other ways? Okay. And some of y'all have heard me discuss things around etheric implants, which are basically different programs that can be in our biofield that enforce methods of control. Okay. But I have expanded my perception on this. I still believe that etheric implants are real. But like I was sharing with some folks, I was just sharing this on a call last week. And, she was telling me, she was like, hey, it seems like you've kind of been transcending this whole etheric implant conversation. Like, you're talking more about grids now and all that kind of stuff. And the way I describe it is, once you get into the architecture, oh, by the way, got to do my little book plug, y'all. Okay. I've been a little quiet. I haven't really been talking and being on camera these days because I had to get this book out. I still haven't gotten my real publisher's copy. This is the one where all of my edits, where I was like editing a whole bunch of stuff and all that. So it's all written in and everything. It has this little gray thing, but it is available for purchase. It's edited. I've cleaned it up. So I go more into the architecture of the simulation in this book. I don't really go into astrology in this particular book. That's for another book, I think. But it starts getting at some of the terms that you might see me utilizing. If you're seeing me utilize different terms or command codes in the subliminals that I'm putting out, I'm kind of going away from the term of subliminals and going more into something called spiral sounds now. And I'll talk about that in a whole other conversation. But if you're interested in some of these terms, because I know you're hearing some stuff that you probably haven't heard anywhere else, and you're like, okay, I'm interested, but I kind of need to learn more, all that kind of stuff, then this book might be a good start for that. Okay. So anyway, back to architecture. All right. So let's say if you've been getting through like this whole concept of etheric implants, right? Etheric implants would be the furniture in a house, okay? So you know how you might be in a house that you don't like, right? Maybe there's like lots of old furniture, maybe there's lots of junky furniture in your house, right? So what you don't like, and there's all going to start by cleaning the house, right? Getting all the junk out, selling the furniture, giving it away, all that kind of stuff. That's etheric implant removal. Space clearing is very important, right? Like space clearing can help with our mental health and well-being, obviously, right? But you still are in that same house, right? That's maybe there's like leakages, maybe the plumbing is off, maybe like maybe there's like asbestos in the house, like that kind of stuff might be going on as well. Okay. So if that's happening, you also want to transcend the house at some point, the structure, or maybe maybe you're not ready to sell the house or move out, but you might need to start working on some of the wiring, some of the plumbing. Third house is about the wiring of a house. Okay. If we consider, the false matrix simulation is a structure, it's a form of architecture. The way we transcend a lot of the control mechanisms, I don't even want to say exit, because that's all based on polarity as well. But if we want to transcend some of these control mechanisms, what we want to start doing is very intensely understanding what they are. What are these control mechanisms? Okay. And this is where you start getting your hands dirty. You know, you go DIY with it. You might not be able to order a contractor, or the contractor might screw you over anyway, right? Because they want the structure to be a very certain way. Let's say you were taking your house to being completely off grid. All right, off grid, living off the grid. Okay, so that's coming up a lot in the collective unconscious now, right? People wanting to get land and live off grid. But what people are really saying, and what people are also really wanting, is something more than that. More than physically being off grid, people are desiring to be off grid energetically. Okay, and to do that, you want to start tracking what's going on in the nervous system, and most specifically, what's happening in your biofield, and that's the third house. Okay, so I went on a little rant. Okay, so I'm gonna go back and let's go real basic with it. What is the third house in traditional astrology? Okay, third house in traditional astrology is supposed to be your neighborhood. It's supposed to be the people that are the closest to you, not quite your mother or your father. That's a little different energy, but your siblings. Also your local community. Okay, so your local community being like your neighborhood. Okay, so people who are third house dominant probably like talking to people, probably like building community, but like more small community as well. But if we think about this more from outside of the grid, and this is where we go into a concept that I call spiral astromancy. So this is something I've developed to make sense of my birth chart, and then also the charts of the folks that I've been working with one-on-one. And I do offer a beyond the birth chart. I started this journey because I realized that there was a lot of information in my particular birth chart that basically said I was supposed to take on the karma of others. I was supposed to loop in different cycles. And that was that. Okay. So a lot of people, when they first start learning about their birth charts, more and more people are getting into the birth chart stuff past the whole like sun, moon, rising, and they're starting to learn about the houses and the transits, as well as astrocartography. A lot of the folks who come into my orbit have already been intensely studying their birth chart, and then they're kind of ready for something else. Spiral astromancy has the audacity, okay, this particular way of interpreting the planets has the audacity to imagine a world outside of the architecture of your birth chart. If you look at the way the birth chart is set up, I have like a little clipboard. I'm feeling like doing a little drawing today because we're going to talk a little bit about geometry. Okay. So I'm not going to do this exactly, but you know, everybody has a birth chart, and then in your birth chart, you have 12 houses. Okay. Let's see. Am I going to do this one? Let's see. Probably need a couple more like right here. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ooh, I need one more. Okay. I guess I'll do one right here. But you have like a little birth chart. Okay. You can always get your birth chart get a free birth chart reading on astro.com to get started. Okay. Always go to your pie chart. Find the little pie chart. There's going to be a whole bunch of symbols on it. If you've never read it before, it's going to feel a little overwhelming. And one thing I like to tell folks is like, that's done on purpose. Like the information, the way that the simulation, but you just got to find the time to find it, study it, decode it, and, you know, do with the information with what you will. Okay. And not get caught up in different loops, different cults on the way, all that kind of stuff that can trap you within the simulation. Okay. But the birth chart itself is a little karmic loop. Okay. So there are 10 houses. All right. There's 10 houses in your birth chart. And that's it. Or sorry, not 10. What am I talking about? Sorry, y'all. 12 houses in your birth chart. There are 12 houses in your birth chart, and you can't go past 12. All right. 12 is the top. That's it. There's also no 0 in the birth chart as well. So once it's very mirrored to the clock, right? If we think about the clock, how we have, we have 12. We have like the 12 on the clock as well. If you think about when you're in school, when you first learn the multiplication tables, what does it go to? 12. Okay, so there's a very specific godly order that happens with the birth chart, okay? And the idea is that it's all a part of the divine plan, all right? And I know when I was first studying the birth chart years ago, I was kind of like, yeah, like I'm going to study my birth chart and learn about my mission, right? And I'm going to fulfill my mission, okay? And I'm going to overcome certain transits and harsh aspects in my birth chart to fulfill my mission. A lot of times your mission, sorry if this is like hella simplistic to some folks who've already been studying their birth chart, but your mission is your north node. Your north node. It's going to look like that. It's going to look like a set of headphones, okay? So your north node is going to be your true north. It's going to show you where you're destined to go. According to the astrological chart, your north node doesn't actually take off until you're about in your late 30s, early 40s. In the meantime, you are in the energy of your south node, and this is supposed to be where a lot of your past life stuff has played out and all of that kind of stuff. I'm here to say that in order to transcend the box that the birth chart puts you in, you actually want to transcend this concept of your destiny or your fate being charted by any external higher power outside of you. Now, that's easier said than done. You can think that, you can know that intuitively, but what if there's different control mechanisms happening in the wiring of your biofield or your structure, the architecture of who you are in the simulation? What if there's a whole bunch of wiring in your biofield that's going to lead you in certain directions, okay? This is where we get into mental manipulation, groupthink, hive mind, that kind of stuff. The neurons, okay? This is your nervous system is actually the third house. So this is a very personal form of communication. So false matrix would say your third house is your siblings, the family that's kind of closer to you outside of your mother and your father, as well as your local neighborhood. But if we take this from a spiral astromancy perspective, or if you look into medical astrology, you'll find this as well. On medical astrology, you'll start seeing that actually the third house is connected to your brain and your nervous system, okay? So that's another thing. I would say spiral astromancy has a few elements. Number one, it's going to soften out the edges, right? So the birth chart wheel, okay, the wheel is a karmic loop. It just keeps going and going and going, and you're never going to get off the wheel according to the simulation. What might happen is you'll incarnate in this incarnation, right, and you'll be at one, then you'll reincarnate it again and be at another aspect, etc., and it'll go on like that. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. That's just a big old karmic loop. Okay, what lies outside of the circle? That's what we're trying to get at. Now, another thing that you'll see a lot in astrology are squares, okay? Once again, lots of angular. So the circle isn't angled, okay, but it is a loop, all right? Then you got squares in astrology, which are pretty harsh aspects as well, keeps you limited in more of a box. And then you also have what they call trines, but I'll just say that it's kind of similar to like a triangle, like triangular aspects within your birth chart, okay? So these are angled sort of systems, but spiral astromancy works on softening the edges, okay? Why does everything need to be in a box or in a loop? What if there's other geometry that's out there that we can tap into in order to navigate and dream bigger and embody a more rich and full existence? So if you think about what a lot of the shapes that were shown in astrology, you'll notice they're really basic. Like these are basic ass shapes that we learned like when we were in preschool. Circle, square, rectangle, like it's kind of like, all right, that's really basic. Are there any other shapes out there? So spiral astromancy gets at that. And we start thinking more in terms of curvature, what I'm calling spiral curvature, okay? Now, not all spirals are going to necessarily leads you to the promised land. This isn't about ascending anywhere. That's another thing. Spiral astromancy takes out this concept of ascension. We're not going up and ascending. We're also not going down and descending. We're also not just going left or going right. I can't even fully describe the language of what this would look like. I'm trying to understand this as this information gets downloaded to me, but I'm just going to try to draw some stuff out to see what happens. It wouldn't just be a singular spiral happening. Spiral curvature would shift the geometry in such a way to where there would be multiple spirals going on at the same time, okay? And this is what is known as omnidirectional. So this would move us from omnidirectionality. So I just want you to consider, right? I'm not great at drawing, y'all, okay? I haven't untapped that art yet. But that being said, just think of how many more possibilities open up when you're looking at your reality from omnidirectional spiral curvature as opposed to a wheel with 12 houses. That sometimes you get squares and sometimes you get triangles and sometimes, you know what I'm saying? Like, just like, I mean, let's take it back. I used to teach preschool, y'all. I don't know if I told y'all that, but yeah, I used to be a preschool teacher. So let's take it back, okay? Let's go back to the shapes. Like, there are many more possibilities that can unfold, random possibilities that can unfold, but many more than if you just, you know, stick to 12, right? Stick to 12 and stick to the angles. And this is, you know, some people might call this more like chaos magic, that sort of thing. You know, that's something you want to do as you transcend the simulation, is you want to find ways to randomize things. The simulation is built on keeping us extremely predictable. So much so that we don't even really, there's no guesswork that's happening. Like, our path is this and we're going to follow this path, okay? And there's safety in that. There's comfort in that. But is it real? You know, is that real and is it ours? So a lot of folks are wanting to go off grid. They want to live off grid. They don't want a predictable path or life, or maybe the path that has been outlined to them in their birth chart sucks. You know, maybe they're like ready for something else. This is why we go into this concept of spiral astromancy and starting to soften out a lot of the angles that we're being presented with. But it means that we go back to the basics. So I'm going to actually do another drawing. Once again, let's go back to the basics. What's another thing we learn in geometry? One of the first things we learn in geometry is the x-axis, which is horizontal, and the y-axis. And this is not completely straight, but just work with me here, y'all. And this is supposed to be up, and we got down, okay? We got side to side, we got our little X here, and we got our Y, okay? So this is also an assumption that happens within the birth chart. And then usually you, you know, this could be the birth chart as well, if you think about this being rounded out. This is actually an indigenous symbol called the solar cross as well. You also might want to study the solar cross too, as you're thinking about embodying omnidirectionality. If you are kind of seeking to increase probability for other life chances within the simulation for yourself, then you want to start thinking about yourself as being on an axis. And where is the anchor of your axis? A lot of times they would say that's in your core. But if we're omnidirectional, or if we start looking at ourselves or our energy as non-local, being nowhere and everywhere at the same time, then you would also want to get off of the cross or off of the axis. This also looks like a cross, okay? So spiral astromancy incorporates the x-axis as well as the y-axis. I'm sorry if I'm losing some people for talking about math. I wasn't really a big math person for a really long time. I'm still not. And I realize now that it's because the math that they were teaching in school, like in public schools, was extremely inverted. So I'm also reconceptualizing this idea of structure and symmetry and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so stay with me. I'm not trying to put you in a math class right now, I promise. Okay, so the x-axis in spiral astromancy would be the grid system, what they would call the ley lines. Okay, this is the horizontal. All right, if we think about things, if you start looking at timeline mechanics, if that's something you've studied at all, the horizontal line is probably the most boring line that you can think of. All you have to do is you can also start typing in horizontal art. So look at art that has primarily horizontal lines. You'll notice that that kind of art was developed in times of when there was like a lot of control in the government, when there wasn't a lot of room for individuality or for creativity, when there was like a lot of conformity. You'll notice in those particular times, they do a lot of stuff with horizontal lines at that time, okay? And then you have more the vertical. The vertical axis gives you a little bit more space, but because you actually have this idea of going up, you can kind of go into this hierarchy. You can also end up in a triangle that way or a pyramid that way, right? And maybe, just maybe, you'll get to the top of that pyramid. Okay, now we're getting into kind of more of that capitalistic type of stuff. It gives you a little bit more options, but you'll still notice that there's only like a couple people that can like rest up here. Most of the people still have to rest on this vertical or this horizontal line. Okay, and then there's all these opportunities for you to come crashing down. You know, this is where we get into collapsing, financial collapse, all that kind of stuff. That happens with the vertical stuff. So a lot of us have been trained in our school systems and all of that stuff to strive to get to the top, to climb the corporate ladder, all of these things, to climb the dimensions, to ascend, to go up, 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 right? And usually when we do that, we also have to give away our density or our shape or our matter, right? They're always telling us to drop matter, to drop density, to drop all the negativity, all the density. That's kind of more bad, and that prevents us from getting to the top. This could also be why we're so obsessed with diet culture and everything else. That being said, there's also something that's happening in the background with that energetically. The more you're dropping your density and dropping your weight and your ability to influence and shape matter, then the more you can be pushed around energetically. And also the more like you can get into those loops around like destiny swapping and all that kind of stuff. And I have information about that on my page as well. But we've been programmed that lighter is better, that going up is better. And this keeps us on a cross. This keeps us in sacrifice programs, and it keeps us extremely limited. This is why, though, chaos has been programmed in the simulation as being very threatening. You know, change, it's one thing to say that you want to be creative and you want more creativity in your life, but it's another thing to embody that. You know, we've felt so safe with our structured predictability as well. So there's a lot that needs to be deconstructed, even down to the cellular level, to start embracing this idea of spiral curvature or the spiral in general within our reality. Just think about it. There's a lot of programs around somebody being too curvy, right? It's like people like curvy, like, you know, bodacious bodies and curves and stuff like that. But there's also a lot of energy around that being negative. That person needs to lose weight. Usually when they lose weight, what happens? They become a stick, right? They become thin. So this is all like geometry is all around us. You know, it's in our language, it's in our fashion, it's in our art. So if you're interested in this concept, start studying geometry. And that can kind of, and I do it from a sense of art. You don't have to like take an actual geometry class. I actually wouldn't recommend it because there's like so much programming within it. But another thing that happens, okay, so we talked about the x-axis and the y-axis, which is really just a cross, okay? And the cross is the form of sacrifice. It's also a huge God program, especially in Western culture, okay? But it's definitely not the only God program. So what about when we add a diagonal line in it? When we add a diagonal line in it, when you start, this is when you start timeline jumping. Okay, so there's a lot going on around timelines and being able to jump timelines. And I have put out information in the past about this as well. But to be honest, I've actually transcended this whole concept of timeline jumping because you're still on the line. And for me, anyways, I'm seeing, collapsing the idea of linear time means moving more into spiral time, which is the time is now. Even when you're planning for the future or dreaming of the future, you're seeing an aspect of yourself that's not with you now, okay? And that can kind of keep you in a loop of always trying to become more in order to meet your future self, okay? But timeline jumping is a thing you can do. And this is where the diagonal lines start coming in. You start adding a little bit more randomization with it. Not too much, because you're still on the line. You're still on the linear sort of framework, but there's a little bit more randomization going on with this, okay? And that's a good way to start. So you can even start looking at art that has infused a lot of diagonal lines. And you'll start seeing that during those particular times when art used more diagonal lines, something that was happening within the collective consciousness is there was more expression. There was more like bohemian energy. There was more like creativity, individuality. Like, I want to kind of be more expressive. I want to express my individuality more. That's the political dynamics that was happening during the time the art of the diagonal was being created. So that's something you can start researching on your own and just kind of seeing the different time periods that art with more horizontal lines was happening, more vertical or upward or pyramid type structures was happening, and then what was happening with art when there was like more diagonals at play. Another thing to study, which I surprisingly haven't really delved into yet, but this is now getting me inspired to do this, is researching, well, when did art become more curved? What was happening in the time periods when there was more curvature in the art? As I'm thinking about this, I'm already kind of seeing different art. I was recently in Colombia a few months ago, and the art was so beautiful there. And they used a lot of curvy, bodacious bodies in their artwork. It was so beautiful. Even if you think about the time when, when we think about femininity and we think about that goddess culture, back in the day, way, way, way back in the day, you saw that goddess art that had a lot of the curvature in it as well. Okay. And there was a lot of spirals that was utilized. There was some sort of information or codes that were playing out within the spiral. Okay. So the spiral, I'm not going to say it's assigned to gender, but there is something, more to do with the feminine aspect, okay? But going back before the time when there was, when you needed two people to procreate, thinking more about this from the parthenogenesis kind of energy. There was a time when wouldn't even be considered somebody who's female, but they were able to self-seed and self-create. They didn't need a gatekeeper to say, hey, you want to create with me? Let's go. There was no co-creation required. All of the creation was already happening simultaneously. That's a part of spiral mechanics, spiral curvature, okay? So how does this tie back into spiral astromancy? The grids are the horizontal lines. These are the gnarliest lines. To master the horizontal, I'm not even say I've mastered it yet. It's a huge deep dive. It's extremely fascinating and interesting, but it's the most constricting. Okay, if you just look at a grid, I mean, if you look at the map of the planet, there's a whole net on it. It's all in our face, right? But the grids are the horizontal axis. It leaves the least amount of room for other. Okay, it's either this or it's that, and you stay in that box, okay, or you pay the consequences. Now, the vertical axis or the the y-axis would lead you to the firmament. What is the firmament? The firmament is the dome. If you look up in the sky and you see the beautiful blue sky, it looks great, but it's a projection. It is a hologram. You know, there's a lot of people putting out content these days, right? About putting out content these days about, oh, the sun looks different, you know, like it's like more white now, but when I was younger, it was like more yellow. What's happening? The hologram is changing, the projection is changing. That's all that's happening with that. Okay. So spiral astromancy requires you that you look at both the firmament, which is the projection that's showing up in our reality, and that's where you'll get the sun, the moon, Jupiter, all that kind of stuff. If you notice, all of the planets, like if you think about like Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, they're all named after Greek gods, okay? So we're getting into the energy of deities and the all-knowing, the all-creator. It's no accident that these planets have been named after these deities, okay? It is a form of worship when we look at astrology. And if we get too caught up in astrology as being the way things are or in divine order, or if we wait for the consent of astrology to say, oh, revolution is happening. So even now we're talking a lot about Pluto and Aquarius, right? Like we're in the Pluto of an Aquarius time. That's supposed to be the time of a lot of chaos, a lot of revolution happens, but it's still being co-signed by the firmament. Okay, the firmament says that there's room for chaos, and so now we can have a little bit more room for chaos. Okay, now that might work for some people, but for some people it might not. And if you are seeking to fully author your reality, like be the author of your reality, then there might come a time where you might even want to transcend the firmament. And that's really taking a hard look at your astrology chart and seeing how these unseen forces have been playing out within your algorithm. And, you know, some people will, and I went through a phase like this once too, where I looked at my chart and saw what transits were happening, and I used it to kind of like, I'll be like, okay, I can't do this, or I need to protect myself more because of this, because Saturn's transiting like this and all that kind of stuff. And that's true. Like you can look at it like that, but it's very, very limiting. Okay. And you are operating within a closed loop system. Okay. So spiral astromancy has the audacity to look at your positionality related to the grids as well as the firmament, and to start adding more randomness, more unpredictability, okay? But you kind of need to know the structure of how things are happening first, okay? You kind of need to know all the ins and outs. It's like that movie, y'all know that movie, Shawshank Redemption? Old school movie, like in the 90s, and that guy, he was like a prisoner and he like ended up escaping, and he did it from like a little like spoon or whatever. He was really smart and he was able to escape, and but the way he had to do it, like he had to know the institution he was in so well. He had to study things so well. He had to study the people in the institution so well in order to do that. Okay, it's kind of that similar energy as well. So how does this connect to your nervous system? Okay, the nervous system are going to, these are the transits. I mentioned this earlier on this live. The nervous system represents like different astrological transits that come, and what will happen is control nodes will happen. Okay, a great way to envision what I'm saying is, if you haven't already done so, you can look at your birth chart. You can get it for free on astro.com. And you can look at the section for, they call it locational astrology. And this is what they call astrocartography. And the first time you look at your chart over a world map, it's really daunting. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But you'll start seeing where your Jupiter line transits within different parts of the world, or maybe Jupiter and Mars intersect within different parts of the world. These are nodes. Whenever two lines are crossing, same thing, ley lines. There are certain energy vortexes that will cross, or there will be different things that will happen that will create places of power on the map or within the grid system, okay? Now, ley line manipulation has been something that has been utilized within the art of war on this planet for a really, really long time. Very occult information, but it's very there's a art to ley line manipulation, or what they call geomancy. Okay, and the sacred geometry that's utilized for this isn't quite so sacred. It's more just a map. It's more just like a form of cartography, and certain people have access, a more highly evolved access to a map that they're utilizing to manipulate energy points within the grid. Okay, so this is the third house, and there are grids everywhere. So instead of just seeing the grid as being on the earth, you know, we think about the grids as being underneath the earth with the ley lines and all that. That is a huge grid, but there are other grids too. Each institution that you go into is a grid system. Your body, your biofield is a grid system. Okay. A lot of times people, when they start getting into the astral realms and they talk about this concept of astral spiders, well, let's think about it. Astral spiders, what do they do? What do spiders do in general? They build webs. And if you look really closely at these webs, they're sometimes you'll find a cool circular spiral web, but I haven't really seen it that much. More so, it's kind of like a whole bunch of crisscrosses, right? You know, and it'll look good, and they'll do it in a cute little way, but it's mainly a bunch of crisscrosses. They are the primordial architects of the simulation, spiders. Okay, they are the grid keepers. They are the grid builders. Okay, and that's one thing that you also will do on your journey as you navigate the simulation, is you will encounter astral spiders. You can either be afraid of them, and they love that. They'll harvest that energy, or you can learn from them. You can learn from spider consciousness, okay? And the idea is not even to create your own web. It might be that you need to unspool a web. You know, webs are connected to fate. They're connected to just the way things are. So there is a grid system that's happening with our astrology chart. When we engage in this spiral astromancy, where we're looking at the grid system from the horizontal axis of the ley lines and the earth and the codes in the earth. You know, a lot of us are attracted to the earth, and we want to save Mother Earth or clean up Mother Earth or help Mother Earth. And I've definitely been in that vibe too. But there are a lot of distortions within the earth's grids, okay? And you might, depending upon the lineage that you're from, like the blood that's running through your veins, the story that's been scripted for you within the simulation, the earth could turn into a straight up enemy, a straight up hater. You know, you go to a certain land, all right, and the energy, the grid system of that place might not be for you, all right? They don't care if you're a light worker or a starseed or whatever. So this is good information to know, getting to the energies of what's happening in different grid systems on different parts or in different parts of the planet planned net, okay? So there's a netting too that you want to intuit. All right. And then also the firmament, a lot of times the question would be asked, I'm asking this question currently. I don't necessarily know if I'm not going to say anything's final, you know. I'm always learning. I literally learn many, many new things every day. But the question is there really a dome? Like, is there a way for you to go out and see the dome that is over the earth, but also over the universe? Because when I talk about the firmament, I'm not talking about the dome over the earth. I'm not getting into the whole like flat earth sort of thing. I'm not really interested in that conversation. But, you know, there's a firmament for the universe, okay? And this is where we get into universal law and stuff like that. Like there's, for example, a universal law of karma. And if you adhere to that universal law of karma, and you have a birth chart, for example, that has tons of karma, And it seems like, and you have asteroids, because there's thousands of asteroids. If you have karma related asteroids, which are in certain placements in your birth chart, which say that you're going to take on the karma of like your whole generation, you know, in a constant loop, you might want to rethink universal law, right? Are you a universal citizen, or does your consciousness or your energy transcend even the universe? There's talks now about things like the multiverse or the omniverse, okay? And then there's even things that transcend that, okay? So expanding our consciousness, widening what we think is possible is kind of critical with entering the spiral. And this is where you start getting more into non-linear living. But you will need to come across the third house in order to do this. The third house, you know, if we want to think about this dimensionally, it could represent the third dimension. There's a very proper way to do things with a third house, okay? It's this, then this. It's very much connected to linear thinking. So if you choose to transcend the grids of the planetary web or the web within your biofield, and really they're just mirroring the same thing, then you'll want to really have a strong conversation with how the third house has been represented. So first thing you want to do is look and see, do you have any stelliums in the third house? Okay, that's one thing. But you might not have anything in the third house. That's a large planetary placement. The next thing you would want to ask is, do I have any asteroids in the third house? Like you might, and also is your third house, like, is it retrograde? You know, retrograde is another thing to kind of consider as well. Retrograde is not always negative too. You know, we put a lot down on Mercury retrograde, but you having like a retrograded third house could also just mean like you're meant to transcend linear thinking. You're meant to transcend and move into non-linear living. It could also mean that as well. So retrograde isn't always bad, because, you know, if we see retrogrades as being bad, then we're on that x-axis, y-axis, right? We're on the upward climb, because retrograde means we're collapsing, we're going down, and that's bad, right? But it could also mean that this is an opportunity for you to open the loop of whatever has been charted out for you. But you would also want to look at, there's many different asteroids related to communication. I'll share some on Patreon pretty soon for folks on Patreon. I just recently shared a whole bunch of asteroids related to health and wellness, but you might want to look at all of the asteroids that you can find related to communication and check and see where they're landing in your chart. And really check in on the third house as well, because this is going to be connected to your nervous system and what happens when you choose to step out of the linear way of doing things. Third house is going to come for you. You know, a lot of times that could mean like your siblings or your community, your smaller community. They might be like, whoa, they're getting really weird. Why are they doing that? You know, and groupthink can be utilized, or hive mind energy can be utilized even in the third house. Now, if we think about this from traditional astrology, hive mind would more so, and it can still represent the 11th house, because this is the house of the collective, right? But the third house represents your nervous system and your brain. So it's the way your literal brain is wired. And you want to get into the concept of understanding that in order to detach your energy from linear thinking. So I'm going to close this live out. I know it's gone so many directions. It's definitely been a non-linear live, true to the topic. Yeah, and once I started contextualizing the third house outside of just like a linear framework, and also looking at it as an opportunity to reprogram my nervous system to be less of a grid and to invite more curvature, or not to see non-linear ways of perception as being a threat, because that's another thing. Your brain will see that this concept of you breaking the cycle of like up and down or left and right, you know, north, south, east, west. They'll see, you know, your brain will send signals that that's a threat, you know. So before you start, looking at your family or your close community, and they might be throwing hater energy toward you, right? And they might be doing weird karmic stuff at you. It's actually a reflection of what's happening in your nervous system. If you're getting attacked in the external, more likely than not, it's because your nervous system is going through its own version of attack, right? You're plugged up to certain control mechanisms, and you're trying to exit or you transcend it. And now there's a lot of fear impulses that are being put into your reality, and that's now being externalized through your smaller community or maybe your family structure and that sort of thing. So you always want to turn it inward, okay? And the first step is retraining your subconscious mind, but even that's not going to be enough. You know, no amount of affirmations. At some point, you got to transcend the affirmations and start seeing things as being a control system, okay, that you're going into and hacking, right? And that's having a really real conversation that sometimes people are not really ready to have around what is the nature of human consciousness, what is the nature of reality, how much is real and how much is simulated, okay? One thing to support you with the third house alchemical journey is, and I've mentioned this before, I've mentioned this like about 8 months ago, I did a download on the corpus callosum, which is the midpoint of your brain. It's called the midbrain. And if you can work on the corpus callosum, it starts helping you to break the binary thinking and you start engaging in more holistic thinking, okay? So I did a download and I mentioned this specific mineral in this download, but I'm gonna bring it back. And interestingly enough, the third house rules the brain. It is called Magnetite, okay? But I also wanna add a little bit more about Magnetite and expand a little bit on what it's been used for. Okay, so a lot of folks, they start going down this path of flat earth or hollow earth or inner earth. Totally been there, I get it. And you start wondering, what's at the North Pole, right? You start asking like, okay, there's talks that you get to a certain point at the North Pole and then you can go into another dimension or you can go inside of the earth. I don't know if that's true. It could be, I don't know. But there's this thing that's called, it's a black rock. It's a magnetic black rock. It's called Rupus nigra. Once you start getting into this energy of there being a firmament or dome around the earth or the universe, you get to this concept of Rupus nigra, which is a magnet that's supposed to be at the North Pole. If you look at the Mercator's map, which was created back in, I think, the 1500s, late 1400s, something like that, you can see Rupus nigra at that Mercator's map, okay? And it is the marking for the magnetic North Pole, magnet, okay? Black rock. And then we got to think about, okay, there's like a pretty big company named that, you know, they're doing pretty well. So that's interesting. Then you start getting into, you know, once you start going there, you start getting into the concept of Saturn and its connection to the magnetic North Pole or this black rock, okay? Saturn rules time. It also rules the grids. It's the structure of the simulation. I've mentioned this prior, but, you know, another thing, if you really want to start studying the grids, you want to become really well acquainted with Saturn and get rid of all of your issues with Saturn. You know, stop seeing it as the boogeyman, the bad guy. It can actually give you a lot of information and you want to start really getting Saturnian in your reality. And it also will support you with, as you're engaging in this non-linear sort of exploration, it'll also keep you I don't want to say grounded because that's a form of containment, but it'll keep you aware of the structures that are at play if you work with Saturn in this process. Because what a lot of people don't want to do is they don't want to get too loopy, because like there's always that fear of like, well, what if I get too non-linear? What if my life gets too chaotic and just everything goes to hell, you know, and there's no structure whatsoever. So if you have that fear as you're on this deprogramming journey, then stick with Saturn. It's going to keep you in alignment with the structures when you need to be in alignment with the structures. You know, it's that concept of knowing the rules or learning the rules so you know how to break the rules or create your own rules, okay? Knowing the game board so you know how to create your own game board. Okay, Magnetite, the magnetic North Pole. Magnetite is found in our bodies. It is a natural magnet, okay? You can find it some beaches, you know, you can go to some black sand beaches and find magnetite. I've had some really powerful meditative experiences with magnetite, and you know, I intuitively knew to put it by my brain, or like kind of like right here, which was kind of like closer to my corpus callosum, that midpoint, the midbrain. And you know, if you think about the poles, right? North Pole, South Pole, that's polarity. And it's to keep us polarized, it's to keep us separate, and instead of integrating into more of a wholeness, a holistic framework. But that's actually in our brains. So I'm going to read out where you can find magnetite in your body. So magnetite is in your brain. It's in your pineal gland. It's in your amygdala. It's in your hippocampus. It's in your cerebellum. It's in your inner ear. It's in your blood. It's in your facial bones. This is what happens when you don't have great handwriting. I can't even read what I said. Oh, sinuses, sinus cavities. It's in your bones and marrow. Y'all, we got magnetite in our bodies. Now, the question becomes, what is magnetism? You know, we talk about this concept of becoming magnetic, right? Magnetizing our hopes and desires and wishes to us. Law of attraction. Believe it and you can achieve it. And if you're not achieving it, it's because you're not in alignment. It's your fault, okay? That's a huge program that happens through the nervous system, okay? Lots of brain wiring, you know, reward, punishment, that sort of thing. It keeps us in fear. It keeps us feeling in lack or lower than or less than if we're not reaching the desires that we might really want to achieve within the simulation. And these are programs that are running within our nervous system. And so how interesting that magnetism is a part of this concept of the law of attraction. Magnetism. So magnetite is structured. If we don't do the inner alchemy, and everything can be alchemized, you just got to know about it. You know about it, and then you start setting the intention to restructure. I have the audacity to believe that that's what works, and it's, you know, I could only speak to what I've seen in my own life and then with working with folks. But you know, I have noticed that on this journey, as arduous as it can feel sometimes, when I set my intention to doing something or to learning a piece of information that seems impossible to know, I'll find it. I will find it. It will come to me, and I will integrate that information, okay, and work to reprogram or deprogram, to do what I need to do to expand my life's chances within the simulation, and also to just have more fun in the simulation as well. So magnets are all up in us, specifically in the areas that control the third house. Remember, the third house is controlled by, controls the nervous system and the brain. So it's also controls attraction and magnetism, because there's so much magnetite in, once again, I'll say, the brain, the pineal gland, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the cerebellum, inner ear. Like, this is all just right here, magnetite, okay? And so if we don't really take a look to start looking at the mineral compounds that we're composed of, and really getting the information that we need to know about how these mineral compounds are running our realities, our bodies, the way that we appear in the simulation, then no matter how many affirmations we do, we'll keep magnetizing to certain events in our lives that we don't actually want to do. Okay. So if you are interested in doing this work of like reprogramming your, or I don't even want to say reprogramming, but deconstructing what's going on in your nervous system, right? And authoring your own reality, start working with Magnetite and start intuiting your relationship with it. Because just because it's in your body, it doesn't mean that it's actually working for you to author your reality. It might literally be canceling out what you consciously want. Okay, so that's why it's important to like really get curious about your biology, about physics, about geometry, because it's literally it's all a part of you. It's what you're interfacing with minute by minute within the simulation. All right. And the last thing I want to end on is just have fun. You know, this can feel really heavy. You know, I mentioned the concept of the simulation being like a containment system, like a control system. Like I mentioned, I think the example I gave was Shawshank Redemption with like a prison break kind of thing. And yeah, that's an aspect of it too. But you can also see it as a game. You know, like think of all the violent video games that people play and they have lots of fun playing them. Like take that energy. You know, if you can have fun playing Call of Duty, why can't you have fun navigating the simulation? I don't play video games, by the way. You know, I talk a lot about life being a game and it being a simulated game, and you can learn a lot about the way the simulation works through the architecture of video games, but I actually don't play video games. So, you know, a lot of times we take things really seriously because it feels really serious. But if we start looking at things more as an algorithm and more as a game, well, you can learn the rules of the game. You can get really good at playing it. And then one day, who knows, like there's many people who have created their own games. They've created their own worlds, and people have consented to entering those worlds and making them real. Why can't you do that? You know, so that's what I also want to end on as well. And the power of your mind is what unlocks that as well. So all of that energy you retrieve from different control mechanisms that are currently holding up your nervous system, and you can take that back and you can utilize that as energy, see it as energy to reauthor the intent of that energy. Okay, so if you're interested in learning more about spiral astromancy, then check out my Beyond the Birth Chart reading on Ko-Fi. It comes with like a 100-page PDF. It's basically going to turn into a book, y'all. But right now it's a 100-page PDF, and it walks you through the different grids. Well, we have grids, mirrors, shells. Those are the main ones: grids, mirrors, and shells. So if we think about the shells as being more of the circular, the mirrors are the toughest ones. And I'll be doing more about the architecture of the mirrors as well. And the grids are those horizontal, those are pretty gnarly too. Oh, it also goes through loops as well. So each house, you're going to find certain grids and loops. Each planet is going to have certain grids and loops. So yeah, if this is something, if you're like ready to start being the architect, all right, embodying that, okay, instead of all these controllers conspiring against you, you can have fun. You can have fun with this. So yeah, so that is it for now. Thank you again. Hope y'all enjoyed this. And yeah, and I'll be back with more breakdowns of each house. All right, bye y'all.